The year was 1944, and I remember one day in particular, and very vividly at that. It was a day after Pesach. It was early morning, and we were told that they are going to take us to the ghetto. We already could see them, by that I mean the Hungarian police, bringing people, Jews, from the surrounding areas. The ghetto would be not in our neighborhood, in a designated area. Everybody was gloomy and sad. My father wasn't home at the time. He was taken to a camp. It was called Munka Szolgálatos. That means a working camp for men. He was taken in 1942. In all that time, of course, I haven't seen him, and we heard very little of him. We were not sure whether he was still alive or not. At 12 o'clock, or around that time, but by midday, we were told that in about a half an hour, we will have to leave our house, and we could not take along anything. We were what you would call middle-class people, not very rich, but well off. We had a store, our own house, garden, some livestock, and of course we were well furnished and all that. And sure enough, in a half hour, the police came and told us we had to leave for the ghetto. And you'd be surprised how we left the house with absolutely nothing, just our clothes. We had to leave everything behind. We didn't even bother to lock up the door, but I don't remember. Maybe my mother did lock the door. We went to the ghetto where an aunt of mine lived. So she gave us a room in her house. But everybody else was crowded into wherever they could get a place to live or settle down. There were families in one that lived in one room, in the backyards, wherever they could find place to live. We were in the ghetto for about 4 weeks. And there were always rumors flying about where they would take us from there, what they would do with us. I remember we could not leave the ghetto, or rather to go out of the ghetto. There were guards all over. But what surprises me mostly now and later on, after the war was over and so on, it was that, you know, Wisho was what you would call a town, a country town. If you wanted to go for a hike in the mountains, it would take you about 10 minutes. There were mountains all around, and forests. All you had to do is just walk for about 10-15 minutes and you could be well into the forests and mountains. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody hid. They could have gone into hiding. And even where the ghetto was, excuse me, you could have run away during the night and gone up into the mountains or forests and hide. It was going into spring, it was May, and you could survive from the foliage, I suppose, and there were streams all over for water, and I know you could pick berries and all that sort of thing, but really, to the best of my knowledge, nobody walked away, nobody went into hiding. So I suppose it was because people couldn't believe that all the bad things that still awaited us would happen. And so rumors were flying around constantly that either they would take us away to a working camp, or they would just spare us or something. But nobody thought, or maybe people didn't want to think, of the things that were going to happen to us yet. So there came a time, about 4 or 5 weeks later, one morning, I think it was the Hungarian police and some SS men, they came into the ghetto and they lined us up in front of our houses or wherever you lived, and they took account of us. And then the next day, they made a transport of a certain amount of people and they shipped them off. Nobody knew where we were going or where they were going. And then there was a second transport, and we were the third transport. They packed us, they walked us to the station, and before we boarded the trains, which were cattle cars, they searched us, and they took away everything of value, what we had on us, jewelry and anything of valuable. All these things. I had earrings in my pierced ears that were given to me when I was born. And they were tiny little earrings with blue stones, and they took that away too. They marched us up to the cattle cars. We were very crowded. I remember there wasn't room there was barely room to stand for us, let alone to lay down or sit down. What bothered me then, what scared me rather, and to this day, I can't stand the sound of a train whistling, the whistle of a train. I think, to me, it's the most horrid sound in the world. It has such a sad sound, a sound of finality. Well, anyway, they closed the cars. the doors of the cars. They locked them, and for a few minutes everything was pitch black in the cattle car. There was a tiny little window with a bar on it, as if somebody could climb out and run away. My mother was a very smart person. She knew, or she sensed what was coming. She never said a word. And during all this time on the train, she didn't say anything to us. I remember there wasn't enough room to lie down, and my little sister was very sleepy, so I held her, I picked her up. I think she fell asleep in my arms. After a day's journey, we became very thirsty. We had what to eat because we took food with us on the train, but there was no water. The Germans wouldn't give us any water. We didn't know where we were going, where they were taking us, but after 3 days of traveling, we finally arrived someplace. The car stopped, or rather the train stopped, and they opened the doors, and we were told we were in a place called Auschwitz. We heard a lot of yelling and a lot of noise. And then some people came up into the train, and we knew at that time we knew already we were in a concentration camp, and this Polish person came over to my mother, and he said, for her to tell me, if they ask me how old I am, I should say I am older than I was at the time. He didn't say much anymore, he went away, but my mother understood what he meant, and so she dressed me up in a long coat and put a kerchief over my head to make me look older. And then we were walking towards what looked to me like a desk, and there were German SS officers there. As we were walking, my mother was holding on to my little sisters, and I was walking with my aunt. And then when we got to this German officer, he pointed with one finger to the left and to the right. He pointed for my mother and my little sisters to go one way, and me in the other direction. And as I looked back, my mother happened to look back also, and she said to me in Yiddish, "Go, go, have no fear." This was the last time I saw her, and these were the last words that she said to me. It was late at night, and they were marching us. I didn't know where we were going, but I remember seeing a great big fire. I didn't know what it was. Perhaps in a way, it was all right that I was so very young, because I didn't understand anything, and I didn't comprehend much. Later on, I was to know that fire. That was the crematorium, going strong from before already. They took us to a place where, I have to come back for a minute. When we were marching, we thought they were taking us into that fire, and one woman was yelling and screaming, and she said to the SS man that accompanied us, she said to him, "Please don't kill us, we will work for you." And he answered her, "What do you think we are, barbarians?" Well, we know what they were now. Well, they took us to this barrack where they undressed us, and they shaved our heads, and gave us different clothes. Of course, nothing fitted. If you were small, you got a great big size. If you were big, they gave you a small size. So you just looked ridiculous. By this time, it was already early morning, and again they marched us to our designated barracks. And as we were walking, we saw two dead girls that were shot from the night before. Supposedly they were trying to run away. We were placed in the sea lager, and I was put into block 14. It was a long building. I never could find out what that long thing in the middle was. It was made of some kind of a cement. Anyway, that divided this long block, or building, what you would call it. On both sides there were bunks made of raw wood, and into each bunk they placed 14 people. It had two decks, an upper deck and a lower deck. Of course, it wasn't strong enough, so it constantly collapsed, and the people who were lying on the upper bunk fell on the lower bunk. So you could hear yelling and screaming constantly. Well, the first day everybody was crying, and just whimpering. I found myself among 500 people and I didn't know a soul. I didn't recognize anybody, nobody recognized me. I didn't know anybody. And of course I was just a little girl of 13. I have no idea how I got through the first days and the first weeks. During the night, I used to wake up and go out, and it scared me terribly because I could always see the fires in the crematoriums burning. It lighted up the sky. It was a very eerie sight. And of course the smell was awful from burning flesh. And the whole camp was encircled by wires that had electric current in them. The sea lager was one of the better known camps. It was very big. I think there were about 32,000 people there, because I know there were 32 blocks, and each block contained about 1,000 people. We had a lagerälteste and a blockälteste, and also a stellvertreterin. That meant the, I suppose it was called the second in command of that block. And every bunk had a Stubenälteste. Those were made up of häftlings, of girls who were able to get these very big positions. For some reason they were very, very mean, even though they were used to be friends of ours from home or neighbors, but there they became just mean. This sea lager was only for women. Sometimes men used to come around to clean the toilets. They were always professional men. They used to be doctors and lawyers. And here the SS gave them these jobs to clean the toilets and do other such work. They used to wake us up at 2 o'clock in the night to stand Zählappell. They were counting us. We stood there for hours. Until the SS men came to make the final count, which was never before 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning. Rain or shine, heat or cold, we stood there for hours on end. I remember when it was quite hot, people used to faint. And when it was very cold, we used to freeze. We got about 3-4 hours of sleep a night. There was nothing to see, only sky and wires. Those were the encirclement of the camp, and of course the towers where the SS men watched us, and the ever-present crematorium. I don't remember anymore the names of my of the camp commander and all that, but I do remember the name of Dr. Mengele. He was the one that selected us when we arrived at Auschwitz, and also later on. There were always selections, and at those times we died 1,000 deaths, because you never knew when it was your turn to go. Of course, Dr. Mengele, that name will never go out of my mind. I will always remember it. We were in Auschwitz a few months. I think it was until about September or maybe October. For some reason, the SS always selected a Jewish holiday for their big selections. In times like these, they used to cordon off certain blocks. You weren't allowed to go out. And then they made their selection in other blocks. I remember when it was time to be selected in our block. I never believed that I will make it because of my youth, and I was very small. I had lost a lot of weight already. But for some reason, I was selected to leave Auschwitz to a working camp. I remember the day very well because as we were marching to the station, we somehow turned in the direction of the crematorium, and I knew that was the end of me. I remember having a small piece of bread that I had saved up. I ate it fast. I said, at least let me finish up my piece of bread. We were walking for a few minutes, and then I heard one of the guards, the SS guards from the back, shouting to the front guard that was walking ahead of the column, saying, no, 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 it's not this direction that these have to take. They are going to the station. You can imagine the joy as we turned around. When we finally boarded the train, That was some relief, knowing that we are leaving Auschwitz. We didn't know exactly where they were taking us, but we traveled for about a day, and of course also in cattle cars, no windows or anything, we couldn't see where we were going. When we arrived at our destination, we found out that we were in a place called Nuremberg. I didn't know the city, I never heard of it. When we arrived at the camp in Nuremberg, of course it was a concentration camp also, the first thing we wanted to know whether there was a crematorium in this camp. When we found out there wasn't, we were just terribly relieved. I remember they gave us something to eat, and it was just delicious. It was a plain cabbage soup. But I haven't eaten anything like this in almost a year. And so it was a real treat. Here the conditions were a little bit better, in as much as we had a bunk that we didn't have to share it with 14 other people. And they also gave us some decent clothing. But the first night was just awful. It was a bombing attack. Our place was burned down, and I was terribly scared because it was my first experience with bombing. They did take us into bunkers where we took shelter, and also the SS guard. Here we worked, or a few of us worked. I don't exactly know what we were doing, but we made little things that had to be very accurate, and so we were treated a little bit better. They gave us a little bit more food, and we didn't have to stand those long zeelappels in all kinds of weather. In this camp at Nuremberg, we were a few months, about 3 months. Here it was terrible, because every single day there were bombing attacks, until finally the whole camp with the working barrack just burned down, and they had to take us someplace else. I suppose the Allies were closing in on Nuremberg. There was no transportation. We walked to the station for about 6 hours, a 6-hour walk. Everything was either burned down or partly demolished from the bombs that fell every single day. We arrived in a place in the Sudetenland called Holaijen. Here was also very bad. Some of the girls worked in ammunition factories, and some of us worked in the field. And here our guards were very mean to us. A lot of the times they beat us. Food was very scarce. I was hungry all of the time. At night I used to wake up just plagued by hunger. I wished for anything that could be eaten, no matter what, anything. Here they also bombed. By they I mean Americans and the English, because they must have known there were an awful lot of ammunition factories and ammunition dumps. After a while, they didn't take us anymore to work. They just kept us locked up, and of course our daily routine was very dull. There was nothing to do, and we weren't really complaining. If they left us alone, we were just happy to be left alone. It's just that at this time the hunger was terrible. We were really hungry all of the time. And then it was one morning, we woke up and something was strange about the whole routine. We didn't see the SS guards, and we couldn't understand what happened. Everybody got up. They picked out from the windows to see where the guards were. We didn't see them. We hoped that they disappeared. But then by 10 or 11 o'clock they were back. So our hopes dampened again. But the whole day was just strange. We were not harassed as much. And it was strange to the fact that we were just left alone. And so the day passed. I remember the day was beautiful. I looked up, the skies were blue, it was sunshine, it was spring. But it was a sad day. We were still locked up. We didn't know about our future. What will be, what's going to happen to us. Then the next morning, it was the same again. We woke up, the guards were gone, And we had that same strange feeling, but somehow of hope. And then all of a sudden, it was also around 10, 11 o'clock, some strange man in strange-looking uniforms with guns in their hands came and opened our gates to the camp and shouted to us, "You are free." We couldn't believe it. These men told us that they were partisans. They belonged to the underground. And they told us to hold fast and wait for a few hours because the Americans are not far behind and they'll come and they will really liberate us. Everybody was just deliriously happy. First thing we did was run to the magazine, it was called, where they kept all the bread and the supplies, the food supply. Everybody ran there to grab for something to eat. Well, Carol, the following I remember very vividly. Like I said before, these partisans told us to stay in camp, stay in lager, and we should wait because in a few hours the American Marines will come and really liberate us. They will come with food and medicine and help and all that. But a group of girls, including me, we didn't believe them. We didn't believe anyone anything. And so, a few of us left the camp and we just started walking. All of a sudden we found ourselves on a highway. And who appears far down the road but a German column of tanks and soldiers. So we became very scared and we said, we ran into the woods to avoid them. Sure enough, they passed us and they didn't notice that we were hiding there behind the trees. After this German column passed us by, we continued on the road until we reached a small town, and we went into a house and we found out that the people of the house were Czechoslovakians, because Sudetenland, you know, is Czechoslovakia, or was. And we begged the lady of the house to let us in and give us something to eat. And she said that her house is full of German soldiers but she was kind and led us into the stable, which was for us a haven. It was warm from the cows and horses that were in that stable, and we were terribly tired and of course very hungry, but we were grateful to this lady for letting us in, and we sat down on some straw, and after a while she came back and brought us a slice of bread for each one of us. We were 5 girls there. A slice of bread and a cup of coffee. And that was just delicious. Oh, we loved it. By this time it was late in the evening, and we just lay down very quietly. We could hear the German soldiers in the house singing and laughing and talking very loud. And after a while we fell asleep from exhaustion. All of a sudden, something woke me up. I opened my eyes and I saw a German soldier standing there with a flashlight in his hand, looking us over. I was just so scared I couldn't utter a word. Nothing came out of my throat. His flashlight kept moving in his hand as he pointed it at each of the girls. After a while I saw him reaching for his gun, and I thought for surely that was the end of us. He stood there what seemed to me like a lifetime, but it must have been only a few minutes. And then his hand came away from the gun, and he turned and left. By this time, all of us were up, and we thought that he was just going back into the house to get some more SS men to come for us, but we were unable to move. So we just waited for them to come and get us and probably kill us. But they never came, and later we heard them leaving the house, and in the morning they were gone. Then this kind lady came and told us that if we wanted to, we can move into the house with her. But we said, no, thank you. Our place in that barn was so marvelous that we didn't want to improve on it. The feeling that we were actually free and that we can sleep was just overwhelming. Nevertheless, I always felt that any minute an SS guard will come and take us away. Anyway, we got up and we walked out of that stable into the courtyard. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, and we were free. In the afternoon, the American Marines arrived in that little town, and for a second time, we were liberated. We had a number sewn on our clothes, and I remember this very distinctly. An American soldier came over to me. He ripped off the number from my coat. That was my Häftling number, and threw it on the ground and buried it with his boot. It was just marvelous. We were finally free.
There's just a couple of questions I have to ask you. How did they know what was happening to the Jews of Poland? Can you explain that for me?
How did who know?
Did you know what was happening to the Jews of Poland? Did someone tell you, or?
Well, we didn't know what was happening, but there were stories. And the only time I remember anything about that was that my mother said, if such horrible things happen to the Jews of Poland, then it will happen to us too. Because some people prefer to believe that nothing will happen to us, only to the Jews of Poland. But they were wrong. And my mother was one who foresaw the horrible things that were to happen to us too. And I remember her saying that the same fate will surely reach us also, that the Germans do not like us more than the Polish Jews.